I'm Phil Gale. Welcome to the programme. The three parties negotiating to form Germany's new government appear to have reached a deal. They'll present their coalition agreement in a press conference that is due to start at any moment. The centre-left Social Democrats, the Green Party and the business-friendly FDP have been in talks since shortly after the elections at the start of September. Now, once the agreement is approved by their members, those parties aim to get Social Democrat Olaf Scholz named chancellor by the beginning of December. So that's the easy bit, right? That's the theory. We're expecting to go across to hear from those three parties in the next few minutes. Ahead of that, we'll go through what we can expect to hear from DW political correspondent Nina Haase. Welcome, Nina.
Hi, Phil.
What have we heard from these talks so far?
Well, they have been extremely silent. That is something that you do have to remark about these coalition negotiations that have been going on for the last 2 months.
That's unusual.
That
no
is
leaks.
highly unusual.
Right.
There were no leaks. There was even a ban on taking selfies with each other, so not to raise speculations about who's getting on with whom, etc. You have to keep in mind this is a first. We've never seen a coalition government like this one that Germany is about to get. This is the Social Democrats, the Greens and the FDP. They have very different partners, but they say they want to essentially lead the government into a new era where they say we are the coalition of progress and enough with the Conservatives. They've essentially put the country to sleep under Angela Merkel, so it's time for the new government.
Right.
And of course, we do know that Olaf Scholz, the lead candidate from the Social Democrats, is going to be Germany's next chancellor. And then there are a couple of other ministries that are interesting for our global audience as well, where we know that the Greens will probably get the foreign ministry, and we are probably going to have Germany's first female foreign minister with Annalena Baerbock, who's one of the leaders of the Green Party here in Germany. So that's a first. And then the FDP will probably, so they are the market liberal party, they will get the finance ministry. And that is something that has been a very contentious issue because, of course, the ideas between the Greens and the Social Democrats on the one side and the business-friendly, market-friendly FDP on the other side, they sometimes go to extreme positions, if you will, when it comes to financing.
If I can characterise it broadly, you're talking about the Greens who want to spend more money on green issues across the board, whereas the FDP are sort of sitting there saying, well, that's a very good idea, but let's not spend more money. Let us do this within the current financial constraints. Is that broadly where we are?
That is broadly where we are. They all want to invest, but they have different ideas about where the money is going to come from. The FDP have been very clear, so the liberal, business-friendly FDP have been very clear that they don't want to raise taxes, for example, whereas the Greens and the Social Democrats have said, look, we need to put all our power into fighting the climate crisis, so no matter how we find the money, we're going to have to raise it somehow and invest massively, or else we will miss all our targets when it comes to the fight against the climate crisis. The FDP have always said, no, we need to give incentives to the market, if you will, to develop new ideas.
And I've heard talk of a sort of a super ministry within what will be the new government, as the whole idea of climate change and fighting climate change is addressed across the German government.
Yeah, there will be, there have been so-called super ministries in Germany before, and sometimes those super ministries then didn't turn out to be quite so super. But this time around, the other leader of the Green Party, Robert Habeck, so the male part in the Green Party, he is likely to become the minister for one such super ministry, which is going to deal with the economy and the climate crisis and the fight against the climate crisis. So that is set to become one of the cornerstones of the next government to fight the climate crisis.
So one of the biggest problems on this new government's in tray is going to be the coronavirus pandemic. How much has that, what Germany and the world is going through at the moment, how much has that played a part in these negotiations?
Well, it has played a tremendous part because, of course, we're currently firmly in the grip of the coronavirus, and there are a lot of accusations that politicians essentially took their eyes off the ball during the summer period when they were all looking to win voter support for the federal election, which then happened in September. So essentially nobody really prepared the country for the current fourth wave that we are experiencing, and we are in such a bad situation right now also because of this transition period, because the outgoing government is still very much in charge, but of course they have a couple of weeks, days now left where they can really set the rules, and everybody's already looking to the other parties that are not quite there. They're not quite sitting in the ministries, but they have to essentially set some guidelines for the next coming months, which are going to be extremely hard when it comes to the coronavirus pandemic. And they had to change the draft law that they put forward to the parliament, which essentially said how Germany is going to deal with the coronavirus pandemic. They had to change it because there was a lot of criticism.
OK, you're watching DW News, live from Berlin. What you're seeing at the moment on television is a hall where we're expecting in the next few minutes the parties who hope to lead a coalition government in Germany, where they're going to make an announcement. What we know at this stage is that the three parties have reached a deal, which is significant. Nina Haase, for our international audience, it appears a peculiar thing to have an election in September and no government for 2 months. But that's quite normal for Germany.
It is quite normal. We never have one party win the entire election, and we never know on the very first night of the election who's going to be in the coalition government, because we always need to have at least two parties in that government because of our party system, because there are so many parties in the Bundestag. And so this is not unusual. What is unusual this time around is that they did manage, even though they're such different partners, they did manage to keep it all secret. Even really well-informed journalists here in Berlin really didn't know what is going to come out. And now the coalition treaty has been sent around. I've got a copy here. It's 170-odd pages long, so obviously I haven't had a chance to read it, and nobody has. And we just saw the general secretaries of the party there, and they have been trying to present this united front. But of course, because they have such different traditions as political parties, they have very different ideas. We've already talked about this.
Let's talk about that, because so let's talk about these three parties and what they stand for. So we have the biggest party being the SPD, then we'll talk about the FDP, and then we'll talk about the Greens. Who are they?
The SPD, so the Social Democrats, which are going to be the one party that global viewers around the world, they will have to remember that the next German chancellor is from the Social Democrats, no longer from the Conservatives. Angela Merkel was from the Conservatives. The SPD is the oldest party here in Germany, more than 150 years old. They come from the labour movement, workers' rights, etc. And they have a very strong tradition, especially in the working class sector. But for a while, they were part of the last couple of Merkel cabinets. They took part in 12 of the 16 years of Merkel government, and they did lose their profile during that period. So a couple of months ago, very few people predicted the SPD to come out the strongest force in September's election. And why was that? That was because Olaf Scholz managed to present himself to the German voters as essentially the guy who is Angela Merkel, but in the male version, who is solid, has a lot of experience, and is a no-nonsense kind of a person. And German voters did like that. Okay. Now, the Greens, they came out of the nuclear protest movement in the 80s, so they're only 40 years old. As a party, they they were very much struggling with their own identity, whether to rage the protest from outside of Parliament or from within the Parliament. And in recent years, obviously, with the climate crisis hitting home and everybody understanding that this is something that the world desperately needs to deal with, the Greens have won a lot of support over the last couple of years. Now, the Greens were, by the way, already a member of a government here in Germany with the Social Democrats in 1998. So they have some governing experience. And then there's the FDP that has also some experience when it comes to governing, because they were once Angela Merkel's junior partner not so long ago. But then they even lost their seats in the Bundestag. So they were so unpopular for a while. But now they've made a comeback as well, because they're presenting themselves as the voice of freedom in favour of digitalisation and essentially bringing the country forward.
All right. So what we're seeing at the moment, just to remind viewers, these are live pictures of what's going on inside the conference hall as we await the leaders of the
Here are the leaders of the parties. Yeah, so you see Saskia Esken and Norbert Walter-Borjans, the heads of the Social Democrats, then Robert Habeck and Annalena Baerbock, the heads of the Greens, Olaf Scholz, Germany's very, very likely next chancellor, and Christian Lindner, the very likely finance minister of the future.
All right, let's listen in then.
Hello, everybody. Good that you have found your way to the presentation of the coalition agreement by SPD, Alliance 90, the Greens and FDP. For short, traffic light coalition. The coalition agreement can be found on the QR code, so you can upload it quickly. Let us now talk about for a while. Let's start with Olaf Scholz as the candidate for the chancellorship.
Meine verehrten Damen und Herren,
Ladies and gentlemen,
bevor ich zum Anlass der heutigen
before
Pressekonferenz komme, möchte ich
talking
mich zu einem
about
sehr aktuellen Thema äußern.
the opportunity of this press conference, let me say a few words about a very topical issue. Corona is not out of sight. Day in, day out, new record numbers reach us. Although through vaccination, many diseases have become milder. So many sick people have to be hospitalized. Intensive care units reach the upper limits in certain places. So the situation is bleak. The federal government, together with the Länder, has taken decisive steps to rein in the pandemic. These measures are enacted now. What is crucial is the implementation of the 2G and 2G plus regulations to lower the infection rates. Only those who are vaccinated or who have recovered from a corona disease or have a certified test will be allowed to events in restaurants and bars, as, for example, to today's press conference. At the workplace and in the public transport, we are applying the 3G rule to reduce the risk of infections. Events, restaurants and at the workplaces, well, these rules should also be taken to heart in private. Vaccination, daily testing is the right measure to protect ourselves and our loved ones. The future federal government will enact the following steps. A permanent emergency staff and we need to observe also the implementation of the decisions. Second, an expert group installed in the Chancellery that will update the corona situation every day and reports to the government. Virologists, epidemiologists, sociologists, psychologists and further experts will be involved. We need scientific expertise to reach wise decisions. It is about close proximity to the facts, to observe and monitor the dynamics and to implement further steps. Third, The vaccination campaign must be rolled out massively. The capacities of the vaccination centers must be expanded. We want to work with mobile teams on our way in cities and communities. We want to involve physicians. And I even think it is right to employ soldiers of the Bundeswehr. We need to vaccinate. We need to provide also booster vaccinations to reduce the propagation of the virus. Further, the measures for the protection of vulnerable groups must be implemented forcefully. For example, to protect the homes of the elderly better. Fifth, for those who provide care in the hospitals and in the care stations, we will hand out a bonus payment. The incoming government will provide 1 billion euros for these extra payments. Sixth, vaccination is the exit route out of this pandemic. Structures that house vulnerable groups should impose the duty to become vaccinated. 7, the decisions taken by the minister-presidents should be as efficient and as early so that we can take the next necessary decisions at the next joint conference of the minister-presidents and the federal chancellor. Ladies and gentlemen, we all hope that the incoming winter would not be a corona winter. Yet nonetheless, we need to knuckle down. We need to keep the distance. We need to take the duty to care, to wear a mask at heart. So it is in our hands to break this very dire fourth wave. The new federal government will do everything to bring our country safely through this time. Which brings me to the proper cause for this press conference, for the finalization of the coalition negotiations. My most important message is: the traffic light is shining. SPD, FDP and the Greens have reached a joint coalition agreement. Therefore, a new alliance for the government of this country is ready. We are now presenting this agreement to our parties to take a vote. We are fully determined to muster the necessary support in the next 10 days. This is the first alliance of red, green and yellow at the federal level, at eyes level for 3 partners who bring in their strengths for the benefit of our country. We are united by the belief in progress and by the belief that politics can do good to us, and we are united by the purpose to improve our country, to bring it forward and to keep it united. It's not about politics of the smallest common denominator. It's about the politics of the big impact. We want to be bold, to dare something. Climate protection, restructuring of our industry, modernization of the country, strengthening the social cohesion. We want to dare more progress. With ambition and with tenacity, we will become the trailblazers in climate protection with a consistent and accelerated climate protection measures. We will support everybody to switch over to climate-neutral economy. High technology made in Germany will be available even in the future. I talk so much about respect in the election campaign. Respect, which has got a lot to do with acknowledgement, but must not stay only in acknowledgement. We will increase the minimum wage to 12 euros in one go, as announced, which means an increase of wages for 10 million citizens. We will also introduce the basic social protection for children that will create better social conditions for children and youth. At the same time, the pensions will be kept at a stable level, and we will continue to develop it. And we have also reached an agreement to fight against high rents, 400,000 new homes per year 100,000 of which will be financed by the government. This will not come at a zero cost. We will invest heavily to keep Germany abreast of the progress. We have agreed on these investments, and we will respect the debt brake that is enshrined in our constitution. Sovereignty of Europe is the cornerstone for our foreign policy. As a strong country with a huge population at the heart of Europe, it is our job to ensure this sovereignty of Europe, to enable it and to bring it forward. Our friendship with France, the partnership with the United States of America, and our commitment to well-being, to welfare and peace are the cornerstones of our foreign policy in this world. Let me now say a few words about the negotiations of the past weeks that you had a chance to observe from the distance, for which I do not apologize. So, over these days and weeks, we have negotiated in a very friendly but also intense atmosphere, in an atmosphere full of trust. All three parties, be it the Greens under the leadership of Annalena Baerbock and Robert Habeck, or the Liberals and Christian Lindner, or the Social Democrats with the Esken, Borjans, or Walter Esken. All three parties have led the negotiations in a constructive spirit, driven by the will to govern this country well and to bring it forward. I liked it very much. And I must say, this has strengthened my feeling that something has grown together in this coalition. The first traffic light was installed in 1929 in Berlin at the Potsdamer Platz. Back then it was a rather unusual technology. Well, people were surprised, but today we couldn't live without traffic lights to make sure that we get the right orientation and to make sure that we get forward. So my claim as the Federal Chancellor is that this traffic light coalition will have a lead role in paving the way in the right direction. Well, I was waiting for the applause, and then it came with a certain delay. Ladies and gentlemen, from our part as well, hello and welcome. While we were negotiating, Mr. Scholz has described the style of the negotiations quite aptly. Some crises, however, have exacerbated the situation in the border zones in Belarus, but especially the corona pandemic. While we were haggling about the wording of the agreement, concerns were lingering in Germany. People are queuing up and have to leave the vaccination stations without getting their vaccination. So we take on the government in a time of crisis, and we are grateful to Olaf Scholz that he has depicted it very aptly. We will have to do everything to break the fourth wave and to hold the pandemic of corona in check. In times where concerns are abounding, it is important to have every now and then also a document of trust and of confidence. And the one that we are presenting today is one such document of confidence. Well, the leading idea is an acting society, investing in government, and a country that is simply functioning. The fourth biggest economy of the world, the strongest industrialized nation of Europe, will receive a new coalition government, one that didn't exist ever before, that has found itself and will continue to find itself. To modernize a country in times of crisis is a huge challenge, and it needs also boldness, and we need to take decisive actions. The basis for these efforts and for this tenacity have been laid now. At the core of this new story that we can write together is the compatibility of welfare and climate protection. This is the red thread that is stretching throughout all fields of policies. We will probably see this most poignantly in the relationship between welfare and growth and the protection of climate and the natural resources. Yes, we have been heckling whether the climate protection targets of the Grand Coalition, that by 2030 the CO2 emissions should be lowered by 65%, that we should increase them. We voted against writing this into our deal. Instead, we opted for an alternative route, not to set the bar higher and higher, but instead identify concrete measures, how to reach the objective. For example, expansion of renewable energies to 80%, measures to keep the price of the CO2 certificates not under 60 euros, so that the phase out of coal must be accelerated. In the public interest, we want to ensure the safety of provision of power and heat. With all the measures, we will reach beyond the 65%. We are en route to reaching the 1.5 objective. We see the spirit of reality. We wanted to write a guideline to act in reality and to do the best possible thing in presence. The second big ecological crisis, well, the extermination of species and also the extermination of farms. This is a huge cry for new forms of farming. You will find the roadmap to these new forms of farming, more ecological farming, reduction of pesticides, structural help to find more environmentally friendly forms of cattle breeding. Dear Christian, Olaf, Annalena, dear friends, Bastian and Norbert, Saskia. Well, at times it has been very stressful. Yes, of course, we were not always rubbing shoulders, but we will also make demands on the population. So we must also make demands on ourselves. The crucial moments were those during these negotiations where we learned from each other. We had first stated our objectives and we cried out and said, how could you be so idiotic as not to understand what we want? But then, behind all those roaring arguments, we found new solutions. Probably this will also fulfill what we expect for society. Contradictions can be overcome by a learning policy, learning Germany, learning politics. That is our promise that we give ourselves. Ladies and gentlemen, we take on responsibility for a country that is really a dire one.
Sie auf das, was nötig ist, damit wir alle
What is
in diesen
necessary
schwierigen Zeiten
in these hard times to preserve the freedom of society and can protect the health of all of us. The government crisis management of the incoming government will have to change. It will be optimized, but it will not be less decisive, less consistent to prevent damage from this country. Health protection is a challenge for the future federal government, but we do have also existing challenges. that we have to work with. Decarbonization of our life, digitization of life, the question of an aging society. Now, these are huge tasks that we have to shoulder together. We also feel that in our country there is a will and also a desire for change. These three parties during the election campaigns of the past years have not hidden their differences. May I put it like this? But we always have preserved a communality. Well, to overcome the status quo. So it is our remit to modernize this country together. Especially the younger generation has given us this job to overcome the status quo of the past years. So we have talked to each other intensely. These conversations have been very discreet and they were kept in secrecy, which is extraordinary for the political culture of our country. But I can assure you, these have been highly controversial negotiations. At times, we haggled for hours over individual statements. Social Democrats and Greens can be proud of what they have achieved through their negotiations in this coalition agreement. They were strong negotiators and they had good arguments, and our future partners in the traffic light coalition, well, we think that they will have very good arguments. For the Liberal Democrats, I can say we will also contribute to the success of future government action. And the bodies of the FDP that have consulted on this agreement are satisfied. What we are forming now is a center government that will bring the country forward. We are forming a coalition where three partners do not limit each other by the incompatible things in their programs. No, rather, we expand ourselves because we have blind spots as we are speaking. So we are not a coalition of exclusion, but of complementary approaches. What we have reached first is, well, Germany will make this plea for solid finances. And I share the concerns of so many about the devaluation of our currency. It will be possible to take off some burdens from the broad center of our society without imposing new burdens on other shoulders. Second, there is so much private initiative, private innovation. We want to unleash this power to continue our path towards decarbonization. We will digitize this state. Fourth, we are following up on this.
Der sozialen Marktwirtschaft, das dringend erneuert werden muss. Fünftens, wir stehen für eine gesellschaftspolitische Liberalisierung.
We are also standing for social liberalization. We are united by these common goals. These 5 points describe the turnaround. We want the audacity of new things, but there is also continuity, things that will not change, that matter to all of us. The Federal Republic of Germany, even with this traffic light coalition, will remain a reliable partner in the Western Alliance, in the European Union, and in the community of democratic governments that respect the rule of law. We have extraordinary and ambitious initiatives in the agreement, very ambitious projects are lying ahead. Therefore, we feel humbled in view of the dimension of what we are planning. This humbleness is, the modesty is an advisable good. We will not be able to implement these projects on our own. We depend upon the support from society and from economy, from the business. We will need also the support of those who have not voted for this coalition and who will find themselves in the role of the opposition parties. During the negotiations, we have become acquainted with a new Olaf Scholz. Yes, we did know him from his former jobs in the governments, from the discussions in the parliament. But we have known him from another side. We have experienced him as a strong leader. Someone who has experience and professionalism enough to lead this country in a good future. But more than anything else, we have experienced his inner attitude with Olaf Scholz has an inner orientation, and thanks to this clear value orientation, he has the power to lead this country into the future, representing many more people than just Social Democrats, Liberal Democrats or the Greens. Therefore, Olaf Scholz will be a strong Chancellor of the Federal Republic of Germany.
Meine sehr verehrten Damen und Herren.
Ladies and gentlemen.
Ist das so?
Sorry?
Bitte, ja, bitte.
Please, Annalena.
Meine sehr verehrten Damen und
Ladies
Herren,
and gentlemen,
in nicht einfachen Zeiten schaffen wir
in times that are not easy as ours, we shape an alliance that is ambitious, that does, however, not shy away from the huge challenges, from the crisis, however, seize the opportunities during these times. In the last weeks, we have discussed at great length with each other. Thank you for the understanding, for the intensity, because we want to create a new start for more progress. We cannot afford leaning back, hiding away behind walls and just reaching out for the smallest common denominator. But in the crucial areas of this country, we want to initiate a paradigm shift. And this paradigm shift is needed for the modernization of the country, for the government of our state, and more than anything else, for the cohesion in our society. Therefore, the biggest challenge of our time, the climate crisis, with this joint draft agreement that we are going to present to our parties, we have paved the way so that we can move forward as one of the biggest industrialized nations and become climate neutral, a climate neutral economy together with our European neighbors and friends. As we started out 20 years ago with the renewable energies, when we brought a new technology into the world, that was not only a technology, but revolutionized the energy policy, and changed international cooperation. This is again a change in paradigm. We can transform our economy in such a way that it becomes climate neutral, and this is a contribution to more security around the world. Therefore, we have drafted a coalition agreement draft where climate neutrality is a common denominator for all fields, from environmental policy, agriculture, industry and economy, but also international cooperation, foreign policy and security policy. So, the question of a joint climate policy needs a European response, and more than anything else, active energy and foreign policy is needed to tackle this huge task that is given to the entire mankind. What we are just seeing here is that we are approaching this task where the crises in our immediate proximity are aggravated day by day. Look at the situation in Belarus. Look at the situation of the external borders of Europe. Therefore, together, we agreed that we want to come back to an active European foreign policy which is based on the strength of diplomacy and dialogue and is based on joint diplomacy which is guided by common values. Another big paradigm shift in this paper is that we do no longer want to see everything from the perspective of adults. We want to create a government of and for diversity. People have felt it again and again, the smallest one, the children, the youths in our country have been seen. Children are not small adults. Children have rights of their own. Therefore, we have enshrined projects like a basic social security for children, which is a turning point not only for social policies, the Hartz IV system, but we lend another significance and relevance to children and youths in the actions of the new government as a contribution to a cross-generational policy that does not separate the groups separated from each other, but sees diversity as the strength. And as this coalition, we are not a homogeneous group. Well, it has been mentioned already, where everything is set in stone and where everybody wants to impose their own will at 100%. No, in a three-way coalition, this will never be possible. But you may even change your standpoint. Christian Lindner, when he sees the number 6, and we do not see a 9. Probably both of us are right, so we just have to be ready to take on the perspective of the others. We see so much separation, segregation in society. To shape a government which is ready to change their perspective means for us modernization of the social contract, modernization of the rights of citizenship, modernization of the family law at eyes level with the 21st century. And we are creating the foundations together. My heartfelt thanks go not only to those who are standing here on the panel, but to all those. And people have asked, why have you convened in such huge halls? Well, we had hundreds and hundreds of negotiators that flocked together in work groups, and heartfelt thanks to all those. By the same token, heartfelt thanks to all those who have turned to us and who have also communicated clearly. Our experience of the last 18 months of pandemic must be reflected in the action of the new government. Olaf Scholz has stated so, and this is one of the first tasks of this new traffic light coalition.
Meine Damen und Herren,
ladies and gentlemen,
mir sehr gewiss.
This is DW News, live from Berlin. You've been watching a special programme as the three parties who have been negotiating to form Germany's next government present, in without great detail, but present the sort of framework that they have agreed. And what happens from here is that they go back to their political parties, they vote on it, and if everyone's happy, Germany has a new government by December. Here with me is DW political correspondent Nina Hase, who was watching that. Nina, so we heard from Olaf Scholz, and we heard from who leads the SPD. We heard from Robert Habeck from the Greens, Christian Lindner from the FDP, and finally from Annalena Baerbock from the Greens. The first three, all of them talked about the pandemic, and it was interesting that 3 of the 4 of them also talked about climate as being the big themes of this government. What were your takeaways?
Well, the Greens had always made it clear that if they were going to enter another government, then they would have to want to make the fight against the climate crisis the top priority of the government. But now, of course, with Germany firmly in the grips of this current fourth wave of the COVID pandemic, it is very uncertain whether there'll be time to tackle that at all initially. You know, they'll be so busy running from crisis meeting to crisis meeting, having full intensive care units, you know, hospitals completely overwhelmed. So this is going to be something that will, I'm afraid, have to wait for a bit. But of course, they're saying, we do want this. This is still our big goal. So the fight against the climate crisis is going to be a top priority. And what I thought was interesting was that they say in their coalition treaty, of course, they couldn't go into all the details just now in the press conference, but you never can. And the coalition treaty is very extensive. It is 170-odd pages long. So, you know, they did spend a lot of hours locked away negotiating it, all the details. So they are saying that their goal is to make the climate-friendly solution always the simplest one in any field. So when it comes to the industry, when it comes to transport, when it comes to all those sectors where people don't necessarily think about, you know, this is a measure to fight the climate crisis, they want to integrate this into policy making.
And we regardless of the detail, we did get some, they did drop some hints, didn't they? There was talk of an increase in the minimum wage, pensions kept stable, and one that made my ears prick up, about welfare payments for children.
Yeah, that is also one of the key election promises of the Green Party. They have, for years now, advocated for children's rights. So to essentially treat children as individuals and not just an extension of their parents. So that is going to become a German government policy now, that children have to be treated as individuals. And this is important when you talk about things like social security, etc., that not the parents essentially get the welfare, but it is essentially attributed to the children directly. So a key promise of the Greens that they are managing to fulfill. Of course, there were other promises that the Greens made in the election campaign that they're not going to see happening because of resistance from the business-friendly FDP. They wanted to limit the speed limit on German motorways, for example, and the FDP was against that. So that is not part of the coalition treaty. But there are little bits. Olaf Scholz and the Social Democrats have for years now said that the minimum wage in Germany has to go up. And so that is also part of the coalition treaty, that it is going to be raised to 12 euros an hour, which is going to benefit roughly 10 million people here in Germany.
Also from Mr. Scholz, we heard something that I think is going to be of interest to certainly Western governments around the world, this plan to fight high rents and talk about government rent subsidies, because this is a problem throughout many of the countries in the West, the fact that housing is in short supply and costs are going through the roof. And this appears to be a government that is tackling this head on.
It is, yeah. They have got all the numbers in here. They say that they want to build an additional 400,000 new flats per year, and they want to subsidise 100,000 of those. And that means that they see the topic of housing as one where they can help overcome social division. You know, social cohesion seems to be one of the key words for this new government. They all mentioned it in the press conference just now, that we have to overcome all the gaps and we have to build bridges, essentially, because there are many parts in Germany where the social differences are very tangible and where, you know, the gap is widening between the rich and the poor. And the topic of building houses used to be sort of a subsection in the Interior Ministry, and it is probably going to become a ministry now. So that is going to be one of their top priorities.
OK. Also, we heard, so we talked about decarbonisation. This is really interesting how they are saying that these are going to be themes through our government that are being faced around the world. Digitisation, which many people will be surprised that Germany is so far behind in that process, but also...
Yeah, and just how far behind, I think many people don't realise, if they haven't come to Germany, you know, for a long time, that you sit on a train and you don't have any network. You sit in the middle, at the centre of a big city like Dortmund, and there is just no internet connection.
OK, so
it's really bad.
That's on their list. But also this idea of addressing an ageing society, which, again, governments around the world are looking at, know it's a problem, and quite often are saying, well, it's, you know, we'll kick that down the road a bit. They're saying, right, this is one of the things that's high on our list.
Well, of course, you know, we had plenty of reports ahead of the election where we looked at the voters' age as well. So, you know, I mean, German society is ageing a lot, so they do have to cater to people's needs. And they say that pensions are going to remain stable, that this is one of the promises. Olaf Scholz, the likely new chancellor, has always said that he sees that as a question of respect as well. You know, if somebody has worked all their lives, then they deserve to live a happy life when they retire, and they need to be able to live off their pension, because many people are beginning to have second jobs as well. You know, I mean, in countries like the United States, we've seen that for years, but this, in Germany, until a few years ago, it wasn't something that you heard about. You know, an old person, essentially retired age, that they would have to have a second job. That is not something that this government says it wants to accept. But of course, it is going to be extremely interesting to watch how they want to bridge that with all the promises that they're going to make, that they're making to the young generation who also have their needs. And, you know, of course, with an aging society and the way the German system works, it's the young people who have to fund the pension system. So you do need to provide job security for the young generation in order to essentially have enough money to pay the older people. OK, so now we have a deal. The bosses have agreed a framework. This, if we form a new government, this is what, these are our themes, this is what we will do. Talk us through what happens next and how it could go wrong. I think what was interesting, first of all, for the global audience was that you saw the very likely German next Chancellor of Germany, Olaf Scholz, from the Social Democrats, just now in the press conference. You probably also saw the next foreign minister, Annalena Baerbock. So if we can just take a look at her and how foreign policy in Germany might change under Annalena Baerbock, because she is quite, she has been quite outspoken when it comes to that active foreign policy that she wants to bring back to Europe. This is something where many people have said Germany has sort of been dragging its feet as well. Foreign policy was essentially done by Chancellor Angela Merkel. So she has said we need to be a lot more vocal when it comes to autocratic regimes like Russia. We also need to be a lot firmer when it comes to China, while not risking and destroying our relationships with those countries, but we cannot tolerate human rights violations, for example. So this is going to be a massive change. Then when we look at who was there at the press conference, we probably also saw the likely new finance minister. Now, finance, again, is an extremely important ministry, like everywhere around the world, because, you know, essentially, if you've got great ideas, you've got to go to the person who sits on the money and on the coffers and have them agree with your plans. So Christian Lindner got a lot from the business-friendly FDP in this current deal. And then we saw probably the likely Deputy Chancellor, Robert Habeck, who is going to be the Minister of Economy and Climate. So you saw the most important ministries essentially representatives. What is going to happen now is that they have to take this big, long coalition treaty to their parties. The Greens are going to ask all their members, and that's going to be a 10-day process where the members can essentially sign off. But because they've been so meticulous and they've had all those extra rounds of talks already, I doubt that any of those parties will disagree, but you never know. It's still a process that they're going to go through. And the SPD and the FDP are going to have special party conventions next week on the 4th and the 5th of December, where they're also going to put this coalition treaty to their delegates and ask for approval. And then we might see Olaf Scholz in power as Germany's next chancellor by the 8th of December.
What we have seen, though, over the years is that the SPD party membership doesn't necessarily follow the leadership line, do they?
That is true. If you talk about the period until 2019, and I would go so far as to say that Olaf Scholz and his team did manage to bring back cohesion to the Social Democrats. They had the most consistent election campaign. They managed to really build bridges between their left camp and their sort of more moderate or more conservative camps. So they were the one party that spoke with one voice, essentially, during the election campaign. So I doubt that it is going to be this time around the SPD who's the tricky party, because, of course, they also won the election, essentially. They got the highest amount of votes. They are going to be sending Olaf Scholz to the chancellery. What I'm more worried about, maybe, is the Green Party, because so far it looks as though this coalition treaty, while there's always the fight against the climate crisis is in almost every headline, they are not going to get the finance ministry, and I've already outlined why that would have been important. And you just have to wait and see whether the Greens will feel that they are taking away enough from this compromise that they've had to seal with the FDP and the
So the deal isn't fully done yet. Meanwhile...
It is done, but I think over the next 1 or 2 years, that might become a problem. I think for now they are going to go with it because they don't want another coalition negotiation round, and nobody wants to go with the Conservatives. Angela Merkel is going to be gone, so the Conservatives currently are in such turmoil. They even don't know who's going to be their next leader, so nobody wants to go with the Conservatives. So this is really the only possible option that they have.
OK, so the likelihood is that the parties will sign off on it. If the parties sign off on it over the next 2 weeks, what then? When do we get the puff of white smoke? When do we say Olaf Scholz is Chancellor and Germany has a new government?
Well, we're going to see the big goodbye of Angela Merkel on the 2nd of December, so that's mid-next week. And then Olaf Scholz is probably going to be Germany's next Chancellor by the 8th of December, and he will probably already talk to Joe Biden as Germany's next Chancellor on the 10th of December.
OK. Dina Haase, a DW political correspondent, has been talking us through what we've just seen. So let me remind you of what you've seen over the last hour. Germany's Social Democrats, the Greens and Free Democrats have unveiled their coalition deal for a new centre-left government. The pact will make Social Democrat Olaf Scholz Chancellor. Christian Lindner of the business-friendly Free Democrats will become Finance Minister, and Annalena Baerbock of the Greens will take the reins as Germany's first female Foreign Minister. More world news at the top of the hour. News Asia with Birish Banerjee is next. Have a good day.